Can they clarify? The government's talking a lot now about cleaning up the wastewater and then re-injecting it back into the aquifers and then giving the proponent credit for what it did, for squirting it back in.
I mean, reverse osmosis works quite well for salts. Depending on how you engineer it and what sort of models or, especially the membranes you buy, some of them do work well for some heavy metals, but not well for others. Right? So a lot of it is like really a fine level of detail around the technology specifically and the membranes, and basically trying to match all of that up. At the end of the day, it means you might have to go, instead of, if you want to meet a community standard, it means you might need sort of 10 trains to do that, whereas companies say, well, what should we do 4? Right? Because that might mean they meet their EPA license, but in terms of community views on the water quality targets, it might be reasonable. The amount of effort might be a lot more than the company could put in. Give examples of why
it's a lot cheaper to do it that way than what it would do.
But this project has got...
Depends on how you do it though.
This project's already got it. I mean, that's the problem, the amount of water they need. They're already doing that to provide enough clean water for them, but they still need...
They need quite good quality water to be able to actually process properly, otherwise the chemistry just doesn't work and they don't get the extractions that they need. So they need water treatment there to be able to continue their process operations. The question is, after all of that, they're going to get an excess water, which then is discharged. So I think just over half, I think, of their input water becomes wastewater. I'm going on memory, but so that's the sort of volumes that they're dealing with. So again, it's got to be designed properly, built properly, and operated properly. And I've certainly seen examples where you can achieve that, but many examples where it's not. So, but again, it depends on the complexity of your input. One of the things, say, if you're looking at a D-cell plant, which we've now got at Montague, courtesy of stupid government decision, but it's solid, constant input. Well, not solid, but it's a constant input. Seawater is very average; it doesn't vary much at all. So when you're looking at moth, they're early dinner. When you're looking at seawater, it's a nice constant chemistry. So you can engineer and build your plant, and you operate it within a particular bandwidth, and it works really well. Right? When you've got things like coal seam gas or this type of project, it's going to be all over the place. Right? And so then the effort and the quality control you've got to go and operating those sorts of things is a hell of a lot more. It's not just your standard sort of process. So it doesn't mean it can't be done, it just means it's much harder. Right? So and certainly some of the test work I've seen out of Queensland suggests they haven't quite got to that level of quality control yet for the CSG projects up there. But they're heading there, but there's still issues. In the organics, some organics just don't get treated very well with reverse osmosis. So you have to go to other methods. So,
I've got a question.
I was wondering about the uranium and spot process. So it's video account and leave on the side. How radioactive is that compared to this process? Like how many times more?
Well, the uranium is still as radioactive as it was when it started the process. It hasn't changed at all. Right? All it is it's changed from being stuck in crystalline hard rock. Now it's been mobilised, so it's put into solution. Those solutions then get treated as wastewater, and some of it will end up in the salt, some of it may end up in other solid residues, and so on. And it's the same for thorium. Right? So it's not that it suddenly lost some of its radioactivity or changed. It's just that it's changed its form in terms of where it is. Right? So instead of being in rock, it's now gone through, dissolved from rock and gone into solution, into the various process solutions, and then it's now moved somewhere else. Right? And so that's really the change. So. I think the question earlier was around depleted uranium, and that's when you've got, you're taking the uranium as it is. It's natural uranium would have 99.3% uranium-238 and around about 0.7% of the uranium-235. Now, if you want to operate a nuclear reactor, the more efficient nuclear reactors, you would enrich the uranium-235 up to around 3 or 5%. If you want to bomb, and it's okay, ASIO, they know I know this stuff, and this is all on the public record, so there's no danger here. And we're talking in terms of peaceful issues, so it's fine. So when you're looking at, say, for a bomb, you're going up to 80 or 90% or more, right, of uranium-235. And so when you're doing that, you're taking out some of the uranium-238 to increase the amount of 235, and then that waste product is what we call depleted uranium. Right? Now, it can be chucked into bullets, it can be chucked into tank busters, and used in shielding for various things, including medical equipment, bizarrely, but because it is actually a very good absorber of things like gamma. But so in that sense, you're not physically changing the isotopic composition or anything else like that in this sort of process. All you're doing is changing the chemistry of it, right? So changing where it is. So So it's not undergoing any fission reaction or any nuclear reaction. It's just it's just changing its chemical form, basically. I hope that helps.
Yeah, how likely is it also to leak out of the, like, how it's going to be stored here? How likely, what would it take for it to leak out, I guess?
Poor lining, bad treatment of the acid. So if you look at uranium is actually a fairly mobile heavy metal. If you look at lead, if you look at some other ones, they're just not very soluble. It's very hard to get them to dissolve in water. Right? Chromium would be another example, generally speaking. Right? So you can get weird situations like hexavalent chromium, which is there in Rokovich film. But if people are interested, there's also civil action, which is a different one. But in that way, when you're looking at it, uranium is actually quite mobile. It's actually easy to dissolve. Now, the way to dissolve it is you use strongly acidic conditions or strongly alkaline conditions. Using sort of neutral pH, maybe pH 6 to 8, somewhere around about there, typically uranium is not very soluble. Now, there's a bit more because it's also, we also need to look at what we call oxidants and reductants in the chemical process, but largely speaking, acid, alkali are a good way to think about it. So if you neutralise all the acid solutions, you will generally not only precipitate out the uranium, you'll precipitate out the aluminium, the copper, a lot of the metals that would be dissolved in that solution. And so instead of being in a solution, it would be in part of the solids or the residues. Right? So that's fairly standard, and a lot of these things are standard treatment methods for various wastewaters. Right? So then it becomes, well, okay, once you've treated it and you've precipitated it out and you've got it as a residue now, right, how do you manage that? And how do you make sure that that's not, if you put more water into it, it's not going to dissolve it all up again and send it out somewhere else. Now, when you look at any tailings dam, every landfill, everything will leak. The question is, how much, where does it go, and then what the impact at that point where it gets somewhere. Now, if you engineer things properly, with a good clay liner that's built with the right type of clay, some clays, when they dry out, they crack open, and so you get nice big open holes. Some clays don't do that when they get dry. Right, so from an engineering point of view, this is stock, standard, simple stuff that we teach undergrads. Right, so a professional engineer, this is part of their job, and so making sure you put all of these things into the engineering of these sorts of features. So you've got your chemical treatment right, you've got the waste containment right, and there's issues like HDPE never lasts forever. Right, now, if it's exposed in the sun, you're lucky if you're going to get more than 4 or 5 years out of it before it has the risks of degradation start to really increase. Right, and we've seen it. People talk about geothermal as a great sort of positive sort of potential. It might be, but when you're leaving HDPE ponds out there like that for years, they do degrade eventually. And you see rubbish in the streets where you've got plastics like that, the same sort of thing. So, so as long as we make sure we follow a lot of that, then sure, we can minimise that rate of leakage. Right, if we know where it potentially could go, right. So if you've got, if you look at some of the Bowen Basin coal mines, for example, they've actually re-diverted some of the streams and so on as well. But in other areas, they've actually, basically mined right along them and built bunds along the side of the mine. So when the floods come through, they overtop the walls and then flood straight into the mine anyway. So some of these things, it's pretty simple engineering we can go through to deal with all of this. Right? It's a matter of making sure you understand that if you're going to put something here and you've got a river here, if it leaks out going this way, what happens? And what's the rate of that? Now, as it's going through groundwater, there may be some chemical reactions that it hits, say, a limestone area and it neutralises, and so things precipitate out again. May well be that you get the reverse and there's some acid groundwater that comes through. Right? So that's the sort of questions that we need to know in order to be able to answer those sorts of questions. So if we've got all of that, then sure, we can start to look at what that may mean. Now, Alkane's argument here is that they're well above the water table. And they've put covers in place, they've got liners in place, so infiltration rates will therefore be low, therefore leakage rates will therefore be low, and because it's all unsaturated, like it's basically half dry soil in terms of full of, say, groundwater, therefore that risk is really, really low. There's an argument to that that's reasonable to an extent, but it's but again, it does depend on all those other caveats around getting engineering right. I mean, I hope that sort of gives you this explanation. Not sure who was next, sorry.
Yeah, actually, Gavin, as you suggested, this highlighted inconsistency between the proposed EIS production feasibility, that was around 90 million tons. Actually, the Alkane report is like 73 million tons. So what I can see from an engineering perspective, the current system proposing EIS will not handle things like all of it.
Yep. That's right.
Could you repeat that?
That's right. The basic point, if you're looking at the EIS, it's proposing a project of 19.5 million tonnes spread over 20 years. right? That's what they're saying to the community, that's what they're saying to government, that's what the project is. Yet to the market, to the stock exchange and their shareholders, they're saying, no, our ore body's 73 million tonnes big, right?
Instead of 19 to 73.
73. I think if I get my numbers right, it's 19.5 versus 73.2. But what's a significant figure amongst engineers? But that magnitude, now that's a 3 or 4-fold difference. Right? Now, what you often find is that even a 73 number might actually be a bit, of an underestimate. It may actually be 100, it may be 150. Right? Mines typically start, they don't drill everything out to start with. They always do enough, that's enough of a project, we'll build that project, and then once they get going, they say, you drill deeper, there's more. We know that. They've done that at Cadia, they've done that in Hunter Valley, they've done that everywhere. That's mining. Occasionally they drill and they find nothing and the project is still 19.5. But a lot of the time, actually, they might find more. Peak Hill, I think, is probably the same. So in that way, I think that one of the big issues that we've got to deal with is the fact that ore bodies are bigger. And so therefore the assessment, the long-term risk, the cumulative impacts that link in a catchment sense, we need to account for that. And certainly the system at the moment, not just New South Wales, it's other